The wind whipped in from the boundless ocean, cold and sharp with the taste of salt. Garcia Wimbledon gazed out at the water, a hand rising to smooth her tangled hair. A note of regret touched her voice as she spoke. The sea air has grown so cold. She glanced back at the handsome man standing behind her. Because winter is coming, he replied, this may be the South, but it isn't the true South. Down there, they don't even know what winter means. In the winter, the fleet can't remain in port. The ocean currents will trap the ships, rendering them immobile. This will have to be their last voyage of the season. Garcia turned to face him fully. Ryan, how long has the Blacksail fleet been at sea? He answered without hesitation, 2 months and 4 days. Barring any delays, they should reach the port of clear water within 3 days. A laugh escaped her. I hope they bring me a pleasant surprise. Ryan looked at the woman before him, his heart swelling with emotion. The autumn sun caught in her gray hair, revealing streaks of pure silver. Her long, narrow eyes were the color of Reseda green, and her gaze carried an intimidating weight. Years at the coast had weathered her skin, leaving it slightly rough, not pale and porcelain like the other royal women. But to Ryan it didn't matter. In his eyes, Garcia possessed a charisma that eclipsed any conventional beauty. She was nothing like the inbred fools of the Greycastle court. King Wimbledon Roman III daughter was a true genius who possessed all the wisdom and pride of a noblewoman, yet she was different. Unlike the rest of the nobility, who clung so desperately to convention, Garcia was more like a commoner, eager to break from the ordinary, filled with anticipation, and driven by a profound spirit of adventure. Of course, no commoner possessed her vision or her capability. No commoner could command the power of a duke. Compared to her, the other aristocrats seemed utterly short-sighted. She had ordered every coin of trade income from the port of clear water to be reinvested into building her fleet, leaving nothing for the treasury. A miser's hoard, she believed, cast no light. He could still remember her words, the philosophy that had changed everything for him. He could still hear her voice in his mind. A gold royal hidden in a cupboard is meaningless. If you don't use it, it's just a stone. Only when it circulates does it show its true value. Spending is not losing. As long as the investment is sound, the returns will far exceed the initial cost. Her words had been a revelation, shattering every concept he had ever been taught. This, Ryan felt, was the true mind of a ruler, unlike the other nobles who merely hoarded gold to watch the coins pile up in their vaults. And so, he had pledged his life to her service, vowing to follow her to the port of clear water. After arriving, Ryan discovered the third princess was far more than a philosopher. She was a woman of action. The Blacksail fleet was the centerpiece of her plan, and she allowed nothing to stand in the way of her ambitions. For 5 years, Garcia, as forces had infiltrated the port of clear water. For 5 years, she had organized and prepared her fleet. All this long before her father, Wimbledon Roman III, announced the royal struggle for the throne. From the very beginning, she had been steps ahead of all the other heirs. "Let's go inside," Garcia said. "The wind is growing stronger." The salty air whipped around them, carrying the cry of gulls. Her palace was a lone tower at the port of clear water, a stone sentinel rising directly from the shore to stand guard over the natural harbor. At its peak was a circular terrace, exposed to the elements, that offered an unobstructed view of the entire harbor below, a perfect vantage point to watch the merchant ships cresting the restless, white-capped waves. After 5 years of relentless work, Garcia, as vision for the port was finally taking shape. A new bark was launched every 6 months. More importantly, she had earned the trust of her people. The princess seemed to be in a good mood, and Ryan decided to voice the question that had haunted him for months. He followed her from the terrace. As he shut the heavy wooden door, the roaring gale was instantly silenced, replaced by the quiet of the room. "Your Highness," he began, "there is something I don't understand." She nodded, a smile playing on her lips. "You may speak." "How could you have foreseen all of this?" Ryan asked. "How did you know to prepare, even before the king announced his order?" He had considered the possibility that her father, Wimbledon Roman III, had told her in advance, but that seemed impossible. After months of deliberation, he still had no answer. Everyone knew the second prince was the heir the king valued most. The king's order had been designed for him. That much was obvious, especially since the prince had been given Valentia as his fiefdom. Could she have foreseen it all on her own? Could she have begun laying these plans 5 years ago? He reeled at the thought. Gods, she was only 18 years old now. She gave him an amused look. "Foreseen? Do you take me for a witch? I have no such ability." "But then," Ryan stammered, "I did not know my father would declare a contest for the throne," she said plainly. "I certainly didn't know he would pave the way for his treasured second son. In fact, there is no connection between the king's order and my plan." No connection. The thought struck Ryan with such force that he could not speak. Seeing the disbelief on his face, Garcia smiled. "Was I supposed to wait for my father to give me permission to fight for the throne? Would I have been ready then? And do you truly believe that whoever governs their little town best will sit on the throne of Greycastle? I thought you, of all people, understood my purpose when you saw the Blacksail fleet." The realization struck him. It wasn't just about the battle for the throne. This fleet, her Blacksail fleet, could change its colors after leaving port, transforming from merchant vessels into pirate ships to plunder the cargo of other cities and nations. The princess encouraged her people to go to sea and join her fleet with a simple promise. All loot belonged to the captain's ship. The port of Clearwater would collect no tax from their profits. This strategy brought her enormous wealth. Just recently, she had ordered the Blacksail fleet to sail directly south, to plunder any ship that passed the endless cape and raid the southern Shaman tribes. But these measures were never just for money. She didn't use the plundered wealth to build up the city or expand land-based trade. Instead, she invested every coin back into the shipyard to build more ships. Over the past 5 years, she had amassed a vast number of experienced sailors and fierce warriors. She had also captured the hearts and minds of her people, binding their fates to hers. If she ever lost her power, every person who had plundered ships and villages in her name would be sent to the gallows right alongside her. So it was never about who governed their territory best. Ryan finally understood. To sit on the throne, she would need warships and soldiers. With them, she could sail up the San Juan River and bring the city of Golden Harvest itself to its knees. "You knew you would be assigned to the port of Clearwater?" he asked. Garcia shrugged, the fine fabric of her dress shifting on her shoulders. "That, I admit, was unexpected. It was part of a deal to increase the port's commercial value. Originally, it was retribution against the church for their attempt to deceive me." He saw she would say no more on the subject and didn't dare question her further. But he knew, with a sudden certainty, that even if Garcia had not been sent to the port of Clearwater, she would have found a way to bend it to her will. "Putting that aside," she said, pouring herself a cup of steaming black tea, its rich, earthy scent filling the air, "it seems our little ploy has failed." "Ah, yes," Ryan said, quickly collecting his thoughts. The report from Border Town confirms the pills failed. We've had no word from the other locations. No news means my brothers killed them. Garcia said dismissively, hardly surprising. They were pawns, easily arranged and entirely expendable still. Her tone shifted, a sliver of ice entering her words. I didn't expect my fourth brother to survive. To be honest, I'm a little disappointed. Ryan cleared his throat. Kingfisher reported that the prince definitely ingested it, but a failure is a failure. Garcia interrupted sharply. I don't want excuses. Soon it will be the months of demons. Our dear brother will have to take refuge in Longsong's stronghold, won't he? Once the demonic beasts invade, he'll be trapped there for quite some time. Write to Kingfisher. Tell her to seize this opportunity. We shall see if fortune favors my brother a second time. Yes, Your Highness. You may go, Garcia said, waving her hand. Just as Ryan reached the door, the princess called to him. One last thing. The pill was acquired from a master alchemist, was it not? Ryan turned back and nodded. What were his claims? She mused. Colorless, tasteless, and that it would dissolve instantly in water. That once ingested, it was incurable. A guaranteed death. His latest and greatest achievement, wasn't it? Garcia let out a delicate yawn. Hang him. Roland stood by the kiln, the dry heat washing over his face as he waited for the first batch of cement. He stood before the brick kiln he had designed, a long, low structure roughly 15 meters in length and 4 meters wide, with an entrance at either end. The front entrance was wide enough for carts and workers, while the rear door was small, just large enough for a single person to pass through Anna's private entrance. For security, a wall encircled half the kiln, and he had stationed guards at both doors. They were Carter's men. Their loyalty was beyond question. The process was straightforward. First, limestone was crushed into a fine powder and mixed with clay to form a gray paste. While iron powder could be added, it was too difficult to produce, so for now they went without. Finally, gypsum was blended into the mixture. The key to the entire process was calcination, achieving the perfect temperature inside the kiln. Roland couldn't recall the specific temperature required, and the lack of proper tools made the process incredibly difficult. He had no infrared thermometer, no thermocouple gun to measure the heat. All he knew was that the melting point of cement was similar to that of iron, and that calcination was a delicate process. In such a technologically primitive era, simply maintaining a furnace's temperature was a monumental challenge. A common open furnace lost too much heat to reach the required 1200 degrees Celsius. A reverberatory furnace could get hotter, but required refractory bricks he didn't know how to make. And a traditional blast furnace, while hot enough, had a narrow chamber that could only calcine a small amount of material at a time. They would never produce enough before the months of demons arrived. Faced with these limitations, Roland had designed a kiln that bypassed conventional heating entirely. Instead, it relied on Anna. Crushed limestone and clay were mixed with water to form a thick, gray paste, which was then spread evenly across the floor of the firing chamber. Once it was ready, the knights locked the heavy front door and cleared the area of laborers. Then Anna would enter alone through the small rear door. She would heat the very ground beneath the paste, raising it to a blistering temperature, hot enough to melt an iron bar left inside as a gauge. Roland paced restlessly, the cool air a stark contrast to the heat radiating from the kiln. This was the first true test of his plan to defend Border Town. If he couldn't produce cement, his dream of building a city wall in 3 months would be just that, a dream. Without a wall, he feared no one would stay in this God-forsaken place. A defensible base, whether in history or fiction, was always the first step toward building something new. Carter Lannes, his chief knight, stood nearby with his arms crossed. "Your Highness," he asked, skepticism lacing his tone, "you're saying this mud can hold stones together?" Though the prince claimed it was the latest discovery from the Royal Alchemical Workshop in Greycastle, Carter was clearly doubtful. After all, that particular group of alchemists had a reputation for being utterly useless. Roland shrugged, avoiding his gaze. "Who knows? That's what they told me." In this world, alchemy and astrology were considered the arts of sages, and were popular among the nobility. The royal family employed their own alchemists and astrologers to predict their fates and improve their fortunes. For commoners, however, such knowledge was far beyond their grasp, and they held little enthusiasm for it. Claiming the cement was a product of the alchemical workshop was a convenient cover, and Roland didn't particularly care if his chief knight believed him. Through a small observation window in the brick, the orange glow from within eventually faded. The firing was complete. Roland rose at once. He sent Carter away and waited alone before the kiln, his heart pounding in his chest. The small iron door creaked open, and Anna emerged. She was naked, her skin smudged with soot. Roland immediately draped a heavy wool robe over her shoulders and handed her a glass of water. "How was it?" he asked gently. The witch's face was caked in gray dust. While the wet paste didn't produce much smoke, the intense burning had filled the chamber with fine particles. Unable to wear a mask, she had endured the discomfort for hours. She gave 2 dry, raspy coughs and nodded. "The mud has turned gray." Too impatient to wait for the kiln to cool, Roland soaked a towel in a bucket of water, wrapped it around his head and mouth, and grabbed a shovel. He ducked through the back door. A wall of heat slammed into him, stealing the breath from his lungs. The air was a shimmering, suffocating curtain. He could feel the exposed skin on his hands begin to burn. Fortunately, it took only a moment to shovel a small sample of the finished product. Any longer, and he might have collapsed from the thermal shock. He stumbled back into the cool air, dumping a pile of grayish powder onto the ground. Anna, now dressed in her witch's robes, stared at it. "Is this what you wanted?" she asked. "Looks like it," Roland said. He flattened the gray powder with the back of his shovel and tested the temperature with his fingers. It was still warm, a fine, gritty dust. "I won't know for sure until we try it." "What is it for?" Anna asked, her voice quiet. "Building houses and bridges, repairing roads," Roland said, his mind already racing. "It has so many uses. If this works, people will have homes that can withstand the cold, the rain, and the snow." He reached out with his free hand and gently patted her on the head. "It's all thanks to you." Anna lowered her head, and for a moment he thought he saw her breath hitch. Theoretically, the fired powder should be ground with gypsum to adjust its setting time, but that was a problem for another day. After a short break, Roland called for Carter, who was waiting outside the courtyard. He handed the knight a shovel and instructed him to mix the gray ash with river sand at a ratio of 3 parts sand to 1 part ash. The chief knight didn't seem to mind the menial work. It was a welcome change from fighting battles or chasing women for the prince back in Greycastle. Since the mixture contained no iron powder, the resulting mortar was a pale, off-white color. Roland scooped a dollop onto a trowel and spread it smoothly on a brick, then placed another brick firmly on top. Cement usually took about 4 hours to set, but to be safe, he decided to wait until morning to test the results. The next morning, Roland hurried back to the kiln, Carter and Anna following close behind. In the crisp air, he opened the door and saw that the mortar between the 2 bricks had hardened completely. making them look like a single block of stone. The surface was rugged, parts of it covered in a fine, crystalline layer of white frost, a natural result of the alkalization process. He squatted down and pressed a thumb against the bond. His heart leaped. It was rock, solid, its gritty surface unyielding. It felt nothing like the brittle texture of dried clay. He pushed with all his might, but couldn't leave so much as a scratch. At Roland's signal, Carter stepped forward. He tried to lift the top brick, but it wouldn't move. He tried to pry them apart with his fingers, with no success. Drawing back his heavy leather boot, he kicked the block hard. The impact echoed with a dull thud, but the bricks merely skittered across the floor, still fused together. Finally, he drew his sword and struck the seam with the heavy steel pommel. A sharp crack rang out as a corner of one brick chipped away, but the bond held fast. Carter stared at the joined bricks, his eyes wide with disbelief. The full purpose of the strange gray mud finally dawned on him. "It's incredible," he breathed. "Yesterday it was like melted wax, and overnight it's become as hard as stone. We can build the wall as quickly as we can lay the bricks. We could surround the entire town in less than 5 years." "And what good would that do?" Roland asked, dusting off his hands. "A tall wall can't stop an enemy within. I would rather turn the wooden shacks in this town into solid houses. Then my people would no longer have to fear losing their homes to fire or storm." The chief knight was stunned into silence, unable to reconcile the words with the man he thought he knew. Roland gazed past the kiln toward the huddled town. "You'll understand one day." He was more certain than ever that he was on the right path. For others thrust into a different time, technology might have been the key to progress. But here, he knew, the future lay with the witches. Soon, cement production was running smoothly. To ensure Anna had enough rest, the kiln was only fired 2 or 3 times a day. To maximize each firing, they needed more raw materials, so Roland issued another recruitment order, doubling his workforce. But he knew he couldn't rely on Anna alone. The fine, gray dust that filled the kiln was hazardous. Long-term exposure would sicken anyone. Besides, once production scaled up, a single witch would never be enough to meet the demand. The witches were not consumables, to be used up and discarded. They were the engine that would drive this world's development. Of this, Roland was certain, but for now, he had to invest all his energy into building the wall. If they couldn't stop the demonic beasts, all other plans were merely dreams. The digging of the foundation had already begun, a long trench that would connect the northern slope of the mountain with the Kishui River. To accelerate the work, Roland took personal charge of the project. Before a shocked and murmuring crowd, he took up a shovel and dug the first scoop of earth with his own hands. Roland had thought that with the cement problem solved, building the wall would be easy, even relaxing. He quickly discovered that his expertise in mechanical engineering was useless for this kind of large-scale construction. How deep and wide should the foundation be? How should they account for the uneven terrain? How could they ensure a wall more than 600 yards long was perfectly straight? He vaguely remembered seeing construction workers on Earth using strange instruments on tripods, theodolites and levels. But here, such tools did not exist. He was a mechanical engineer, a world away from the civil engineers who undertook such projects. The local builders he'd hired had never worked on anything of this scale, meaning Roland's own limited knowledge was all they had to go on. As a result, work on the wall began at a crawl. It took an entire week just to dig half the required foundation. When a project spirals out of control, the final product is anyone's guess. The painstakingly dug foundation looked more like a shallow drainage ditch than the base for a mighty wall. Despite Roland's repeated descriptions and gestures, the trench's width was wildly inconsistent, narrowing in some places and widening in others. From a distance, it resembled a twisting snake etched into the earth. Even so, Roland refused to stop. He was consumed by the work. When Anna wasn't firing the kiln, he spent his entire day on the northern slope, standing at one end of the trench, squinting, trying to guide the digging with his naked eye, one slow shovelful at a time. He also doubled the reward for any stonemasons who answered his recruitment call. Fortunately, the predicament did not last long. Just as Roland was preparing for the sixth firing of the kiln, his assistant minister, Barov, reported that a stonemason had finally answered the call. The man, a former member of the prestigious Mason Guild, was waiting for an audience outside. When Roland heard the news, he nearly burst with joy. He immediately recalled the Greycastle Mason Guild. It was a renowned organization. Even as a prince, he had heard of them. Though they had been forced to disband over some construction error, their skill was legendary. How could he have ever hoped to finish this wall without the help of a true master? Roland composed himself and nodded. Show him in. He considered sending Anna away, but quickly dismissed the thought. It was unlikely to be a problem. Very few of border towns' 2,000 residents had ever seen the witch's true face, and her appearance had changed dramatically. Dressed in a fine wool robe instead of rags, she was a world away from the desperate, death-seeking girl she had been. He doubted anyone would recognize her. Karl van Baart's heart hammered against his ribs as the knight led him into the courtyard. He had a plan. First, inform the prince that this was the wrong season for such a large project. Once he had earned his trust, he would carefully broach the subject of witches, but the rumors painted the prince as a wild, unpredictable man. What if his counsel was poorly received? He bowed low, his thoughts a whirlwind. When he lifted his head, the words caught in his throat. He stared, his mind blank. The girl at the prince's side, she was hauntingly familiar. It felt like a dream. Karl rubbed his eyes, looked again, and gasped her name. Anna. Roland froze. How was this possible? He had summoned a craftsman, not the witch's neighbor. The man's expression said it all. He knew her, otherwise he never would have recognized her. Roland shot a look at Carter. The chief knight understood instantly. With a heavy thunk, the iron latch slid across the door, sealing the only exit. "Teacher," Anna whispered, her voice barely audible. Her reaction sent Roland's mind reeling. "Teacher." Warmth flooded Karl's eyes, and his vision blurred. His knees gave way, and he collapsed, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "I'm so sorry." He choked out, the words broken. "I'm so sorry. Thank the gods you're safe. Thank the gods." After Karl van Baart composed himself, he slowly rose to his feet and bowed deeply to Roland. "Forgive my outburst, Your Highness. I forgot myself." "What is going on here?" Roland demanded. "Are you not a stonemason?" "I was," Karl said, his voice now steady. His Highness hadn't killed her. The person on the gallows must have been a substitute. The realization clarified everything. It didn't matter why the prince had rescued a witch. Even if he intended to make her a concubine, it was infinitely better than crucifixion. This proved the prince did not fear the evil incarnation the church described. He told Roland everything: how he had fled from Greycastle to settle in Border Town, the college he had opened, and another of his students, Nana Payan, who had also tragically become a witch. He ended his tale by pleading with the prince to take Nana into the palace as well, to keep her safe. Anna stood at Roland's side, her expression filled with concern for Nana, but she remained silent. Another witch. The news was both important and welcome, but the name Payan, He seemed to recall it. A quiet word with his assistant minister confirmed they were a minor local noble family. "You may bring her to me," Roland promised. "If she is a witch, I will ensure no harm comes to her. But I cannot take her from her family, especially if they have not threatened her." He hesitated, then decided the truth was best. "And my rescuing Anna is not what you imagine. I need her help. The idea that witches are servants of the devil is utter nonsense. I believe their power, whether good or evil, can be controlled. So, Anna, Nana, or any other witch, as long as they do not break the law, I will not condemn them." With that settled, the prince quickly turned back to the matter at hand. "Now, let us discuss business. You took part in the construction of the Greycastle city walls." "Yes, your highness." Karl nodded, his relief palpable. The fourth prince was nothing like the rumors suggested. He had never expected the prince to need a witch's help, but his wish to protect Nana had been granted. That was more than enough. "Good," Roland said. "I am building a wall from the Kishui River to the foot of the northern slope to defend against the demonic beast invasion. From this moment on, you are in charge of the project."